Welcome back. You're still tuned into Climate Clock and we are discussing everything about COP28, the updates there as well. Ashish Chaturvedi, Head Action for Climate and Environment, UNDP India, is joining us now. Mr. Chaturvedi, thank you so much for joining us to discuss something that has been on the cards and has been discussed for so long now. There have been a lot of updates from COP28 as well. We have had a lot of discussions. Can you give us a sense of this recent collaboration? UNDP and the Ministry of Environment has put out targets when it comes to sustainable cooling. Can you give us a sense of what is the outcome here? What does the report say? Because cooling in general is known to be very polluting.
Well, thanks very much for having me on the show. And let me clarify, it's not UNDP and Ministry of Environment. It's basically India is committed to targets globally on what they would like to achieve under the Montreal Protocol of the Paris Agreement. Montreal Protocol, not under the Paris Agreement. Let me clarify. But the idea is that there is substantial effort going on to push the agenda on sustainable cooling. Because there is going to be greater demand for cooling going forward. India is a developing economy, it's an emerging economy, and there are people would need more cooling solutions, not only at to cool their homes, but also in the industrial sector, in the agriculture sector. And therefore, there can be significant implications on the demand for cooling. And of course, the fact that you would need refrigerants which have significant global warming potential. So in order to do sustainable cooling, one needs to actually look back at several options. One of them, of course, is to look at traditional ways of how Indian communities did cooling. So we need to use our indigenous and traditional knowledge to start thinking about cooling much better and much more significantly, even in a more advanced and industrialized economy. But we also at the same time need radical innovation to look at refrigerants which have low global warming potential. And even at the COP, when we had the side event at the India Pavilion, there were Indian companies who were presenting their innovations and how they're trying to have near zero global warming potential refrigerants, which will allow us to have enhanced cooling, but also lead to less impact on the environment and, of course, on climate as well.
Okay, that is interesting. And you spoke about how industries drive this particular segment as well, right? What is the pathway to phasing out HCFCs? Is there a sustainable way of cooling in India? The word that you had with different companies, what was the outcome? The entire value chain, is it ready for this transition?
So as I mentioned, there are companies here who are actually talking about low global warming potential refrigerants, which would essentially mean that you can expand your cold chain, you expand your cooling solutions without having a significant impact on the greenhouse gases. Of course, we are also thinking about people who are living in rural areas, for instance, working in agriculture, and how 40 to 60% of the agriculture produce still gets wasted even before it reaches the market. So how do you use decentralized cold chain solutions using solar energy rather than using traditional forms of energy or fossil fuel based energy? And I think there has been some movement there. Lots of companies, small startups have started putting out these decentralized solar cold storages. In fact, we are also partnering with the Bihar government under the state rural livelihood mission, which is called Jivika, where we are working with nearly 5,000 women farmers to provide them access to solar power-based cold storages, decentralized cold storages. So I think these are the kinds of solutions and innovations that we'll have to work on going forward as well.
Okay, interesting there. So, what has the experience been at COP28 so far? Global stocktake is a key agenda. Any indication what it would be like? Some of the big takeaways for you at the summit so far?
So I think the process is still ongoing. The initial paper was already tabled before the meeting began here. And of course, the gaps are apparent, right? So we are not in alignment with the 1.5 degree goal. We're still talking about anywhere between 2.8 to 2.9 degrees, with the current policies and programs and also the nationally determined contributions. There is, of course, a gap in the amount of means of implementation, as they're called, in terms of financing, in terms of technology. And I think the stocktake also points to that. And of course, there is sort of discussion around the issues of fossil fuels. So how do you start thinking about phasing down and phasing out? And there are of course, those issues will be discussed and are being discussed and will continue to be discussed till the end of the meeting here.
So, I've asked this to every expert who's been in the field for a long time, and I have to ask that to you, despite the report that has come by before COP as well. Do you think it's given that 1.5 degrees target is under threat, we will not be able to achieve that?
So, well, it is, of course, under threat. I don't think anyone's going to deny that if we do not completely transform our approach, and of course, we have very little time for it, it is under threat. I think under various scenarios, there is only a 14% likelihood, and I think this comes out from the UNEP emissions gap report as well, and adaptation gap report as well, that there's only 14% chance that the 1.5 degree will not be breached. So I think we're really talking about a situation where the 1.5 degree target is under threat. And we have to now see what is it that we do in the next 5 to 7 years. If we really want to be aligned with that pathway. And of course, in worst case scenario, if that is breached, then we at least are aligned with the 2 degree pathways. But having said that, I think there is great amount of momentum here in Dubai. And of course, you would have been hearing about the various pledges which are being made as far as enhanced financing is concerned, and the enhanced cooperation on technology, on energy, on, of course, loss and damage as well. But I think it's critical that we keep this momentum going, not this year, but of course, over the next 5-7 years.
I totally take that point. In fact, COP28 is something which has seen a lot of updates coming by, even in the initial stages, right? So that was going to be my next question. You spoke about the pledges to loss and damage. Are you happy with the amount or the attention that this particular fund is getting? What about climate finance? Because those are not really fungible like that.
Well, it's a great beginning. Let me just say that. And I think everybody was very excited when the loss and damage fund was announced right up front. Of course, the details need to be worked out. The pledges are coming. Some pledges are ambitious. Of course, the scale of financing required for loss and damage, recovering from losses and damages is, of course, in the orders of billions, if not more. So right now, we are talking about the total capitalization of this fund of around $700 million to $800 million. So we are far from the number that we would ideally like to see. But I think it's a great beginning. I think it's a good signal. I think it's also a reconciliatory. And it's basically bodes well for what can be done in the future. Details need to be worked out. How will the funding flow to the different countries? Where will the institutional mechanisms be set up? Of course, the World Bank's going to be the trustee, but where is the facility going to be located, and so on and so forth. So I think these are issues which we will continue to discuss going forward. Climate finance is going to be discussed further in the next few days. Is there an agreement on what beyond $100 billion? Is there going to be a quantified goal beyond $100 billion? That needs to be seen as well. But I think there is now greater realization that we need to push and keep the momentum, because there are certain signs of impacts on communities which are being felt all over the world. And we need to be mindful that if we really want to avert substantive losses and damages, and of course also get onto a low carbon and climate resilient pathways, we need to be working much more closely together, and all countries need to actually play their part.
Okay, no, absolutely. Everyone has to take their part. But there are certain things which India must be looking forward to. Some of the pledges they have not agreed to. Coal phase out, there has been a big debate around that. There was the health and climate pledge as well, which India did not agree to so much. Is there something that specifically India should watch out for or contribute to in coming days at COP?
I think India's played a fairly proactive role in all of these engagements. And I think some proposals which you agree to or do not agree to are based on several considerations beyond the discussions here maybe at the COP. And they're also influenced by other kinds of discussions in other negotiations and other kind of international diplomacy circles. So I think on the global goal on adaptation, I would really say that we should double down our efforts, because there are increasing signs that we need to invest much more on adaptation than we have in the past. And if there is a sort of some kind of an agreement on the global goal on adaptation, then it would give a clear signal to the investors as well as to sort of all countries which are affected by the changing climate. And therefore, I think the global goal on adaptation is very critical. The follow-up on the global stocktake and what actions emerge as far as a result of the global stocktake, what kind of sort of ambition is raised as a result of the global stocktake. I think this is where India will continue to play a significant role as a leader of, as a voice of the global South as well. And given the fact that India's kind of achieved quite a bit in advance of its sort of targets, right? So, for instance, I think the ministry already announced that India has achieved some of its NDC goals much ahead of time. So, therefore, I think India is also waiting for reactions from other parties, of course, acting on its own, but also looking at similar reactions from developed countries to push the sort of, well, the provision of means of implementation, especially technology and finance. And I think those will be issues that have been flagged over the last few decades, will continue to be flagged here as well, because more action is needed on those areas.
Okay, all right. Take that point, Mr. Chaturvedi. Thank you so much for joining us today with your take, what's happening at COP and what India should be doing and is already doing when it comes to climate action. Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thanks so much. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay, all right. With that, we'll take your leave on this edition of Climate Clock. Stay tuned to CNBC TV18 for more news and updates.